From Tucson, Arizona, this is Democracy Now!
Scott, how's it feel to be coming out here to be part of a water drop for the first time since your trial in over a year?
It's good to be back out in the desert and just be having a presence out here again and to be part of that, part of the work that people are doing.
Is this against the law in these parts?
Humanitarian aid is never a crime.
Then 3 months after the government put humanitarian activist Scott Warren on trial here in Arizona for providing aid to migrants in need, we follow him and other volunteers on a water drop deep in the Sonoran Desert, where their group No More Deaths regularly leaves water and food for people making the perilous journey north from the U.S.-Mexico border. Scott Warren's trial ended with a hung jury, but the government will retry him in November. Meanwhile, people are continuing to die here in the borderlands. At least 3,000 people have perished in Arizona alone in the past 2 decades.
From 1990 to 1999, there were an average of 12 remains of border crossers brought to this office each year. From 2001 through the present, that average is 164. What changed was U.S. border policing strategies.
We'll speak with Robin Reinecke, co-founder of Colibri Center for Human Rights, a nonprofit that identifies the remains of thousands of migrants that have been found here in the Sonoran Desert. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Afghanistan, a series of bomb attacks rocked restaurants and other public spaces today in the eastern city of Jalalabad, injuring at least 66 people. Afghanistan is marking the 100th anniversary of its independence today. The attacks follow Saturday's bloody suicide bombing at a wedding in Kabul that killed 63 people, wounding around 200 others. The attack was the deadliest this year in Afghanistan. This is the groom from the wedding.
I've lost hope. I lost my brother, my friends who came to join my wedding party. The celebration of Independence Day does not matter to me anymore. I don't care whether the government is going to light up the city. It's the Independence Night, and it's dedicated only to the rich people who celebrate it. All those killed were laborers and poor people attending the ceremony. Rich people do not come to participate in poor people's ceremonies.
The attack came as the U.S. and Taliban are reportedly close to a peace deal after months of talks between the two parties. The Afghan government, however, has not been a part of the negotiations. Afghanistan is due to hold elections next month. In Hong Kong, organizers say as many as 1.7 million pro-democracy protesters took to the streets Sunday in the largest demonstration in weeks. Protesters marched in the rain as the popular uprising, which started 11 weeks ago, showed no sign of slowing down, despite Chinese soldiers lining up on the border with Hong Kong and threats by local officials to jail protesters for life. No major incidents were reported after weeks of confrontations by police and organized gangs. In the disputed region of Kashmir, at least 24 people were injured and 1 man killed, according to local reports, as protests took place amidst an ongoing lockdown. Indian forces reportedly used tear gas, chili grenades and pellets to disperse the demonstrations, which came almost 2 weeks after India revoked the special status of the Indian-controlled part of the Muslim-majority region. This is a protester speaking out against the conditions in Kashmir.
The days of 24 hours, out of which they eased the movement restriction for half an hour. I'm worried about everything, my children and my family.
Activist Kavita Krishnan, who recently visited Kashmir on a fact-finding mission, said the region is under complete siege and even young children are being arrested as an act of intimidation. Pakistan has asked the UN Security Council to intervene in the crisis. An Iranian oil tanker seized by British authorities in Gibraltar last month was released Sunday. The ship was released after Gibraltar rejected a U.S. request to keep detaining the ship, which it says is in breach of U.S. sanctions because it operated by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Gibraltar said the sanctions, however, do not apply in the European Union. Iran warned the U.S. against seizing the tanker as it departed from Gibraltar. Israeli soldiers killed at least 3 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip Saturday night, according to local officials. Al Jazeera reported the men were believed to be militants, but had acted independently, according to a Hamas source. Earlier on Saturday, Israel launched air raids on parts of the Gaza Strip. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Sunday he was prepared to call a wide-scale military operation in Gaza. Back in the United States, Congress members Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib are set to hold a news conference to address the travel restrictions imposed on them by the Israeli government. Last week, Israel barred the 2 U.S. Congress members from entering Israel to travel to the occupied Palestine after President Trump took the unprecedented step of publicly urging Israel to deny entry to the first 2 female Muslim members of Congress. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi blasted Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for their quote, weakness after the move. In a statement, Omar called Netanyahu's decision an affront, while Congressmember Tlaib justified her decision not to make the trip after she was granted a waiver to visit her grandmother on humanitarian grounds by posting a quote from anti-apartheid leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Desmond Tutu, who said, "I am not interested in picking up crumbs of compassion thrown from the table of someone who considers himself my master. I want the full menu of rights," Tlaib tweeted. Meanwhile, Tlaib's grandmother has spoken out since the news was announced.
May God ruin him. I was happy she was coming. I was excited that she was coming for her grandmother to see her.
The hashtag #MyPalestinianCity, meaning My Palestinian Grandma, trended on social media over the weekend as users posted tributes to their grandmothers in Palestine in solidarity with Congressmember Tlaib. Hundreds of far-right protesters took to the streets of Portland, Oregon Saturday for what they dubbed the End Domestic Terrorism rally. They were outnumbered, however, by counter-protesters who gathered across the city as police escorted members of the Proud Boys, Patriot Prayer, and other right-wing groups across one of Portland's main bridges. Police arrested 13 people throughout the day and seized weapons, but the day's events largely avoided the worst-case scenario Portland's mayor, Ted Wheeler, said Portland was prepared for. One of the rally's organizers, Joe Biggs, told a reporter the event was a success, pointing to recognition by Trump, saying, quote, "Go look at President Trump's Twitter. He talked about Portland, said he's watching Antifa. That's all we wanted. We wanted national attention, and we got it. Mission success," unquote. Earlier in the day, Trump tweeted, "Major consideration is being given to naming Antifa an organization of terror. Portland is being watched very closely. Hopefully the mayor will be able to properly do his job," the president tweeted. This is a spokesperson from Rose City Antifa speaking at Saturday's dueling protests.
We absolutely reject the label of domestic terrorism. Anti-fascists are not domestic terrorists. We're the people who stand up for our community and defend it from the people who want to do our community great harm.
A number of Republican politicians have called for Antifa to be recognized as a terror organization. A Republican congressional memo obtained by the Tampa Bay Times cites Antifa as a violent group responsible for gun violence, despite 0 deaths being attributed to Antifa protesters. The FBI found the majority of domestic terror in the United States is caused by white supremacists. 3 possible mass shootings were thwarted in recent days. Ohio police arrested a white supremacist Saturday after he posted a video appearing to threaten a Jewish community center. 20-year-old James Patrick Reardon posted an Instagram video last month showing a man shooting a semi-automatic firearm as sirens blare and people scream. The accompanying caption reads, "Police identified the Youngstown Jewish family community shooter as local white nationalist Seamus O'Riordan and tags the location of the Jewish community center of Youngstown. The FBI raided his house Friday, seizing semi-automatic weapons, dozens of rounds of ammunition, a gas mask, and bulletproof armor. Meanwhile, Florida authorities arrested 25-year-old Tristan Scott Wicks Friday after he sent text messages to an ex-girlfriend saying he wanted to commit a mass shooting. One of the messages said, quote, "A school is a weak target. I'd be more likely to open fire on a large crowd of people from over 3 miles away. I'd want to break a world record for longest confirmed kill ever," he said. And in Connecticut, 22-year-old Brandon Wagschel was arrested and found in possession of a cache of weapons and ammunition after a Facebook post showed he may be planning a mass murder. Gun control advocates rallied in cities nationwide this weekend to call for Congress to pass background checks on all gun sales and so-called red flag legislation, which allows family members to ask a judge to temporarily prevent someone from owning a firearm if they pose a risk of committing violence. There is a growing call for an automatic weapons ban. A correctional officer in Rhode Island who last week drove his truck into a line of peaceful protesters calling for the release of asylum seekers has resigned. Captain Thomas Woodworth rammed into a group of Jewish activists with the Never Again Action Coalition, sending 2 of them to the hospital. Another 3 demonstrators were hospitalized after being pepper sprayed by correctional officers also on the scene at the for-profit Wyatt Detention Center. The ACLU of Rhode Island called the attack, quote, "an attempt to chill the exercise of First Amendment rights by hundreds of peaceful protesters," unquote. Matt Harvey, a spokesperson for Never Again Action, noted, quote, "If this is what he's willing to do to a crowd of mostly white protesters in front of cameras, just imagine what's happening inside that prison where no one's watching." And the New York Police Department judge who recently recommended that Daniel Pantaleo be fired from the police force said Pantaleo was untruthful and his account of Eric Garner's death was implausible and self-serving. Pantaleo killed unarmed African-American Eric Garner in 2014 by using an illegal chokehold, but was never convicted or even removed from the police force. When questioned by investigators, the officer denied using the prohibited move, despite a viral video clearly showing that he did. Judge Rosemary Maldonado issued her findings in a legal opinion reported by the New York Times. The final decision about Pantaleo's fate will be up to New York Police Commissioner James O'Neill and is expected by the end of the month. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today we're broadcasting from Tucson, Arizona. Just under 3 months ago, an unprecedented trial took place here. Amidst a catastrophic immigration crisis at the border, ongoing family separation, and cruel and inhumane conditions at immigrant jails across the country, the government put humanitarian activist Scott Warren on trial here in Tucson. His crime? Helping migrants who had arrived on the doorstep of a humanitarian shelter in Ajo, Arizona, seeking help after a perilous journey across the Sonoran Desert. The government charged Scott Warren, a longtime volunteer with the humanitarian aid group No More Deaths, with 3 felony counts, including conspiracy for providing food, water, and shelter to 23-year-old Cristian Perez Villanueva of El Salvador and 20-year-old Jose Zacaria Gaday of Honduras. All 3 men were arrested January 17, 2018. If convicted on all charges, Warren faced 20 years in prison. At the same time, he and other No More Deaths volunteers also faced separate misdemeanor charges for leaving water jugs and food for migrants on a national wildlife refuge in the remote desert. The trial here in Tucson took 8 days. Warren and other No More Deaths volunteers provided hours of testimony on desert conditions and the policies that push migrants deeper into the deadly region each year. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned without a verdict. 8 of the 12 jurors found Scott Warren not guilty. The government will now retry Warren in November, though they've dropped the conspiracy charge against him. We'll try him on 2 felony migrant harboring charges. If convicted, Scott Warren faces up to 10 years in prison. As he awaits his next trial, Warren met us in the remote town of Ajo, Arizona this weekend to show us firsthand the work he does with No More Deaths in the treacherous Sonoran Desert, just north of the U.S.-Mexico border. Since 2001, the remains of over 3,000 migrants who died in southern Arizona have been found. That's an average of more than 150 dead a year. But immigrant rights activists say the number may be closer to 10,000. We joined Scott Warren and other No More Deaths volunteers for his first trip in a year as they made a water drop in the desert.
We are in the center of town here, just south of the plaza, and we are at our newly opened humanitarian aid office. The office is really here to support what's been a long tradition in this town and many other places in the borderlands of providing humanitarian aid, water and food and things like that to people who are coming through our communities.
So today we're going to go into the desert with you. And this is the first time you'll be doing this since the trial?
Yeah, we'll go into the desert today on a little tour and see some of the areas that people are walking through or migrating through, and some of the areas that No More Deaths and Samaritans and various other humanitarian aid groups do their work in.
So why don't we go into the office? And I saw a map there. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Paige Korich-Klein, and I'm our media coordinator, and I've been volunteering since 2013.
Can you tell us where we're going to go today?
Absolutely. So right now we're in the Ajo Aid Office, right here in the town of Ajo, and we're going to drive south out of town and take a right on a road that starts as Darby Well Road, but then turns into what is called the Devil's Highway, and it continues all the way to Yuma, and it's a pretty well-known road. There was a book written about it, about some migrants who died in that area, but we're gonna follow the road south. It's right here.
That book was?
The Devil's Highway by Luis Alberto Urrea. And it was about a group of migrants that actually died on the Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge. So we'll be south of where that book took place.
So Scott, tell us where we're going.
We're headed out into Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, and we're going to do a big loop and check on some water drop locations that we maintain out in the desert.
And water drops are?
Water drops are the places where we leave food and water and other humanitarian supplies for people who are walking through the desert and would otherwise be without those things.
Scott, can you describe what's happening? We see a Border Patrol van up ahead. What is it?
Oh yeah, we just, there's some Border Patrol activity in this area, which is not unusual. This is definitely one of the areas of a lot of enforcement and one of the areas that we do our humanitarian aid work in. So we're entering into the Growler Valley, which is this big valley coming up here, and that's also a very active area. So.
You guys want to stop at this one, or do you want to go a little farther to the furthest?
Let's throw some water here.
Paige, can you tell us what you're doing?
Yeah, so we're there's a rescue beacon right behind us, and so we're just going to leave a couple gallons there. So if anybody sees the beacon and walks towards it, they'll find some water.
What's a rescue beacon?
So a rescue beacon are these towers that are made by Border Patrol, and they have a button on them where if somebody goes up and pushes it, Border Patrol will come and what they call rescue, but what is actually detaining them. But the beacons don't have water at them, so when we drive by them, we leave some so that if people see them, they'll be able to get some water.
So you're leaving water
and just a couple cans of beans, so there's some food here as well. Rescue beacons are something that Border Patrol in all of the trials have really talked about as their efforts to save lives, but they actually don't have any data showing how effective they are. And we've actually, the one time that they released data, it showed how many times the buttons were pushed and how many rescues they resulted in. And in the Yuma sector, rescue beacons were activated a couple thousand times, and it resulted in, I think, 4 rescues. This one you can't really tell, but some of them you can see there used to be a Red Cross on them, like on the sticker, and the Red Cross actually told Border Patrol that they had to remove that because Border Patrol is not a humanitarian aid group that's associated with the Red Cross. So it used to have that kind of international symbol of help, and it was removed.
We're in Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, and we're approaching the boundary with the Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge. And right on that boundary line between the park and the refuge is what they call Boundary Camp, which is a Border Patrol forward operating base. So it's attached to the Ajo Border Patrol Station, and they use this as a base in the wilderness here, essentially, to conduct patrols in this Growler Valley area.
We've stopped here, Scott. Why? Why aren't we going right into the refuge?
Well, I can't set foot into the refuge right now, and as you mentioned, Amy, that's because of the misdemeanor charges that I face that are related to the provision of humanitarian aid on the refuge. And then I also face felony charges for the what the government calls harboring of migrants. So we're here on the boundary. We'll continue south through Organ Pipe and check on some water drop locations in the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, but we won't actually go on to the Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge.
The government was forced to drop conspiracy charges against you for helping migrants, but the felony charges of helping them remain. It shocked many because it was a hung jury. 8 of the jurors said they would have acquitted you, but the government decided to move forward with this case. So why do you persist? This is the first time you've come out on the range since your trial, the first trial, and yet you're here with your group delivering water.
It's part of just regular work that we do out here to check on these water drops and just to be a presence and to witness what's happening out in the desert. It's very remote out here. And one of the things that we do is just being a presence out here in case we do run into people, and to be a witnessing presence as well is really important. So being out here is a good thing, and it's just something that those of us who live in Ajo and do this work really feel compelled to be out here this time of year, especially.
As we drove here, and we're right next to the Border Patrol forward operating base, I mean, it sounds like a war, but so do the casualties. No more deaths, having encountered the disintegrating bodies of migrants, the bones of migrants who had died much earlier, not far from where we're standing right now, your group.
Yeah, that's right. You mentioned the casualties here, both the people who have died, migrants that really have been sort of forced out into these remote and rugged areas for decades now as a result of prevention through deterrence, the way that the border is enforced. So there's the direct impact on people who have died, people who have suffered out here, people who have been disappeared, and then the ripple effects of their families, the trauma that creates, the traumatic experience of this is another way that it can feel like a conflict or like a war zone. I don't like the war zone rhetoric that you typically hear politicians use because it's deployed to increase militarization and building of walls. But it's appropriate when we think about the trauma that people have faced as they cross through these areas and the trauma that their families experience and the pain.
So talk about this forward operating base of the Border Patrol who come out here, stay for days in rotation. Actually, this wasn't built during the Trump years, but under President Obama.
Yeah, there have been different versions of a forward operating base on Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument for probably at least a decade or so, but this one that you see here, it's very established, is fairly recent, probably within the last 5 to 7 years. It's built on Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. So
this is a military base built in a national park.
A military base built in a national park on Hiachid Atam land and territory.
On Native American territory.
On Native American territory. So the levels of dispossession are many here of the indigenous people that have always lived here, and this has always been their territory. So it's layers upon layers, really, of dispossession and pushing people off the land.
Just as we got out of our car here, just as we, here we are at Organ Pipe, but we're not going on to Cabeza Prieta because that's not safe for you, a helicopter flew overhead. Talk about the significance of these helicopters. Who controls that plane?
Those are CBP helicopters, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, and they are out here looking for people, and they fly really all up and down this valley and through these mountains and in different areas. And on the one hand, they can come across people, who want to get rescued. They want to get apprehended. People might set like a signal fire or something, or be desperately trying to signal because they've run out of water and they want to be at that point. They've come to the end, and they are doing everything they can to get themselves rescued. Those helicopters are also, though, part of prevention through deterrence. So they will also end up scattering groups of people. They can chase groups of people, further sort of disorient folks, and that's really the brutality of it. Is that.
Explain that, the scattering. I mean, there's the famous book, The Devil's Highway, and if you can talk back then what happened and how that continues to today.
It's part of a larger sort of enforcement strategy of the border, which is prevention through deterrence. So to really increase hardships on people with the hopes that people will basically give themselves up. So on the sort of biggest scale of the border, that looks like building walls and fences in urban areas and pushing people out into the Growler Valley in rugged and remote places like this where it's very difficult to cross. On more micro levels, that can be, like we were talking about, with a helicopter that might cause a group to scatter.
And what does that mean?
That means seeing a group of people and flying close to them, flying low to them.
And they scatter, but what does it mean for them, for the migrants?
For people who are scattered by that, it can mean death.
If you could quickly summarize, you're actually facing, you're involved in 2 separate trials right now.
That's right, yeah. I have facing the misdemeanor charges resulting from humanitarian aid work that we did, particularly in the summer of 2017. Providing water and food and doing search and rescue and recovery work on Cabeza Prieta. So the charges I'm facing with that include operating a motor vehicle in a wilderness area and abandonment of property. And the other charges I'm facing are from a separate incident, and those are the felony charges of harboring, which resulted from an incident that happened in January of 2018 when I was arrested with 2 men from Central America, Jose and Cristian, at a property in Ajo called The Barn. And so they charged Jose and Cristian with illegal entry, and they charged me with harboring.
So the jury was a hung jury on that?
That's right, yeah. The jury was a hung jury in the first trial, and then the government initially had also charged me with conspiracy, and though they dropped the conspiracy charge, and now they're just pursuing the 2 harboring charges.
By dragging out these 2 cases, are they in fact, whether you are acquitted or not in these 2 cases, getting what they want, preventing you from speaking fully or going to all the places that you went to help migrants?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know what their purpose is, frankly. You would have to ask them what sort of the goal of all of this is. It's really unclear, I think. But certainly, I've been affected by it, my life, and my partner, and my family, and my friends. And at the same time, there's a lot of awareness and a lot of people that want to help because of the level of awareness around this as well. So it's ironically had the effect of also bringing a lot of people here who want to do something to help.
And it clearly looks like it's across the political spectrum about humanitarianism. I mean, all of this happening against the backdrop of the separated families, of the children dying in Border Patrol custody one by one. I mean, since you were first charged, scores of migrants have died. What is the count from something like 2,000 to now 3,000 migrants have died? That's averaging, 150 migrants a year.
Right, and that number is for Arizona, for what we know. Border-wide, including South Texas and California, it's much, much larger. And those are numbers of people who have been found.
Can you describe this Border Patrol van to us that just passed?
That's a pretty typical Border Patrol truck that's been used here, and they're rigged up in that way to carry people they've apprehended, detainees. So that's what that cage is on the back. You can see, I don't know how many people in the back of that, but that's what they're for. Also at this forward operating base, we see a cage. So explain what happens from cage to cage. That's right, yeah. People will be apprehended in the field typically and then put into a truck like that or another vehicle, and then they can be brought here to this forward operating base, and there's a sort of garage door in a enclosed fenced area where they can be offloaded and then put into the facility inside, which is a detention facility, and then from there they get taken to the Ajo Border Patrol station, which is probably another 1 to 2 hours drive on dirt roads to get back to the highway. Further processed there, and then from the Ajo Border Patrol station taken to the Tucson sector headquarters.
So at this forward operating base, tell us how many border agents are here and how has it grown over time?
In the Ajo station, there's something like 400 to 500 agents that work out of there, and it's grown significantly. In the early 1990s, there were something like 24 agents at the Ajo Border Patrol station. And that station has the capacity of up to 900 agents. So that could be the number that could be there, I suppose. So it's grown significantly in the past couple of decades.
So what do you plan to do from here on in? I mean, you face a trial and you face this other case as well.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's become somewhat normalized, I think, this litigation and sort of waiting for trials. And so we'll continue to wait, and I'll do what I can. And I'm being just held and carried by so many good people and so much support. And so I'm extremely lucky to have that as I face a felony trial. I think I'm probably the most supported person that's ever been in a situation like this.
We're joined right now by Gina Jackson, who's with No More Deaths. Gina, talk about this terrain and what this means for migrants.
Sure. So where we are in the Sonoran Desert, it's one of the hottest and driest parts of the country, of the world. And because of government policies like prevention through deterrence, migrants who are crossing the border are actually funneled into some of the deadliest parts of this terrain. Where we are right now is kind of emblematic of the mountain ranges in this area. These are the Growler Mountains over here, and then where we're standing is actually the Growler Valley. It's really flat, and there's not much signs of any other humans or civilization. So to get lost in this area, there's not a lot of places to go for help.
And where do people come over the border to get here?
So it varies. A lot of people start at a town just south of Lukeville-Sonoita crossing. Sonoita is the town.
In Mexico.
In Mexico, yeah, in Sonora. And some people leave from the town itself, and some people are dropped off or walk some distance outside of the town. From Sonoita, which is pretty close to the U.S.-Mexico border, about 40 miles north, there's a checkpoint. And then there's the town of Ajo. And then another 40 miles north, there's another checkpoint, and that's the only paved road in the area. So migrants leaving from Sonoita are not just walking outside of the little bit of border wall that is outside of the city center and then pushes people deeper into the desert, but then people also walking deeper into the desert to get around the checkpoint, not just the first checkpoint, but 2 checkpoints. The second checkpoint is about 80 miles north of the U.S.-Mexico border, which makes this journey over 100 miles.
And tell us where we are south of right now and the significance of the kind of final mountain in the Growler Range, where that is.
From here to where that peak continues to be Cabeza Prieta, the National Wildlife Refuge. Past that peak starts the Barium Goldwater bombing range, which is shared by the Marines and the Air Force, and it's an active bombing range, and there's also proving grounds out there.
This is named after the senator, the former presidential candidate.
Yeah, so past that peak in the distance, which is the last really distinctive peak that we can see from here, then begins the bombing range, which has no public access, and which our humanitarian aid organizations have only gotten access to once in the many years of doing this work. And when we did get access to that area, we found many human remains in just the couple of hours we had in the land jurisdiction.
Explain.
So in this area, we record the human remains that are found. It's not a good indicator of the total human lives lost, but just the human remains that are found, which is limited because of our limited access to this area. This is the only public access road until all the way up there on the other side of the mountains. That is the next public access road that you're even allowed on. We can hike in this area with permits from Cabeza Prieta. In July 2017, Cabeza changed their permits to add a clause that specifically said that leaving food, water, blankets, medical care, specific language to our work would now be in violation of the permit. So it's put us in a place where to do our work, we need to violate a wildlife refuge permit. The bombing range is completely closed to public access. In one incident, another search and rescue group got permission to be escorted onto the range to do a search and rescue with a bombing range escort, and in just a couple of hours they found over 10 human remains on the bombing range. If you look at the maps of recorded human remains, there are no recorded remains anywhere on the bombing range, which we know is obviously not true because in the few hours we've had access to that land, we found a dozen. So it can be presumed that many, many people have lost their lives on that land, and we can't recover their bodies or even know just how great this humanitarian crisis is.
The journalist John Carlos Frey alleges there are mass graves under the Goldwater bombing range.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, just in this area, when we first started exploring along the west side of this range, I mean, days will go by where we'll find 3-4 human remains just in one day after spending many, many days out there hiking. The loss of human life is immense, and the number of people in the U.S. and in other places who have disappeared family members and don't have any closure of knowing what happened to them is also massive. But for where we are now in the Growler Valley, this is still south of the bombing range. So if there's that number of human remains here in this valley, we can only imagine how many more people are dying 40 miles further north.
Sonoran Desert. This is Democracy Now! Again, Gina, Jackson as we stood in the Sonoran Desert in southern Arizona. When we come back, she, Paige Corrich-Klein, and Scott Warren go on a water drop. It's Scott's first time in more than a year. He faces a November retrial for helping migrants last year. Stay with us. They built a wall by an architect. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman, broadcasting from Tucson, as we continue our journey into the Sonoran Desert with humanitarian activist Scott Warren and No More Deaths, deep into the Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument, just north of the U.S.-Mexico border. Scott and two other volunteers, Gina Jackson and Paige Corrich-Klein, hiked into the desert over the weekend to leave food and water for migrants.
Scott, how's it feel to be coming out here to be part of a water drop for the first time since your trial in over a year?
It's good to be back out in the desert, and it's good to just be having a presence out here again and to be part of that and part of the work that people are doing.
What are your plans right now? Where are we, and what are you going to do?
We're in Oregon Pipe, and we're heading in to check on some water drop locations that are just up in these hills here. So we're hiking in to check on those areas.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know about the presence of migrants in this area?
We've spent several years now out in these areas doing search and rescue, search and recovery, and doing water drops. And so we just know that people are moving through these areas and have been moving through in large numbers for a while. Also in these mountainous areas, oftentimes there's trails that people will hike, and so it's easy to find those trails and sort of find evidence of where people have gone before, and then that's where we try to get humanitarian supplies to people.
Have you found bodies or bones in these hills?
Yep. Yeah, we have. Unfortunately, where we're going, in fact, there's been several recoveries that we've been involved in, and searches, and people who have died in this area. Yeah.
Can you describe this area we're walking through?
Sure. An area that's from here we're probably maybe 15 miles north of the border as the crow flies, and we're hiking into these mountains on the west side of Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument, which is Hiachadatam land and territory, and it's Sonoran Desert. It can be really difficult to walk through because even these areas that might look like they're flat, there's actually quite a bit of terrain and topography because there's these washes. So oftentimes what seems like it could be even just a flat, easy walk is like really strenuous because you're dropping down into these deep washes and then climbing back out and then going again and going down into a wash and climbing back out again. So it can be really difficult to hike through here.
Can you say what a wash is? A little gully?
Yeah, it's a gully. Yeah, it'll have water in it when it rains, but most of the time it's dry. This is one way where we know where to drop water, which is we're on these trails that are pretty distinct and are used by migrants.
And what were they created by?
By people, by migrants just walking through here over time and establishing this path.
So as you make this water drop, I mean, we are standing here, it's over 100-degree weather, just walking for, half an hour. It is so beyond depleting. Yeah. For migrants, some of them walk for days, and it can even be hotter than this.
Yes, yep, that's correct. Yeah, days in this weather. You can't carry enough water. Even if you're able to carry 4 gallons of water, you'll go through that. And so people are dependent on finding the few water sources that do exist in this desert, which sometimes you get to a watering hole and the water can be quite dirty or it can be dry. So it's really risky.
So whenever we leave water gallons, we write messages on them, just simple things for people to find, partially so that folks know that it's not Border Patrol, putting out water that's a trap, and also just to kind of show a level of care and solidarity with people who are making a really dangerous trip. So we just write little notes on them and then leave those for people to find.
What are you going to write?
I usually write kind of religious notes, so vaya con la fuerza de Dios, or que Dios bendiga su camino, which means go with the strength of God, or may God bless your journey. Yeah.
Gina, can you describe what you're writing on that bottle?
This one I wrote ánimo and mantenga la fuerza and si se puede, and words of words of strength. I don't know. We've asked some of our patients before what would feel good to read on the gallon, or what would be a nice message, or what, I don't know, what makes the water seem more trustworthy. And a lot of people have said more religious stuff, and a lot of people have said ánimo. So, ánimo it is.
Gina, you're now laying out canned beans. Why beans?
So we lay out the cans that have pop tops so that people can open them pretty easily, and we want to put out things that have calories in them and also salt. Drinking water is not enough. A lot of dehydration comes from an electrolyte imbalance, so you need sodium in addition to water. So we want to put out salty food, or beans have calorie and is starchy and has sugars as well. Just for some caloric intake in addition to the water.
And you're putting this in the shade.
Yeah, well, so we want to protect the pop tops because you can't get in the beans or any can very easily if you can't get into it. So a lot of times we'll put them upside down so that birds won't peck at the shiny part and break the pop top. And also if it rains, we don't want water to collect in there because it'll rust the pop top. So we put those underneath here. And then we just want the gallons to be in a shadier area just to protect the plastic so it doesn't disintegrate, and for a better quality of the water. But we'll come back and check on these drops within 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then can swap out if anything's gotten old, or if things are used, we'll pack up the empty gallons and leave fresh ones.
Is this against the law in these parts?
Humanitarian aid is never a crime. It is a humanitarian imperative to try and ease the death and suffering in this area, and regardless of government agencies trying to prosecute humanitarian aid workers, we maintain that humanitarian aid is never a crime.
As you watch this, Scott, what your colleagues are doing from No More Deaths, do you get to describe this in the courtroom?
Yeah, I'm just noticing the energy of this moment, and I think maybe because all of us are here and hear my friends describe the messages that they're writing on the bottles. It's so routine for us that we do this, that even I forget how important and how beautiful and really kind of sacred it is for us. And it's an honor for us to be able to be out here and do this work, I think.
That was Scott Warren with No More Deaths. It was his first time in more than a year accompanying a water drop in the desert. He faces a November retrial for helping migrants last year. When we come back, we speak with Robin Reinecke, co-founder of Colibri Center for Human Rights. She identifies the remains of thousands of migrants who have been found in the Sonoran Desert. Stay with us. Bad Crazy Sun by Sidewinders, a band from here in Tucson. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We are broadcasting from southern Arizona. Since 2001, the bodies and bones of more than 3,000 people have been found in the Sonoran Desert. Immigrant rights activists say the number of deaths could be alarmingly higher. We end today's show looking at how the Colibri Center for Human Rights here in Tucson is working to identify the remains of the thousands of migrants who have already perished. Since 2013, Colibri has received nearly 4,000 reports from families in Mexico, Central America, and other regions searching for their loved ones who disappeared while crossing the border. In the past 3 years, Colibri has identified at least 100 of them through meticulous forensic work and DNA data collection of migrants' remains and family members who are alive. In 2018, Colibri Center launched the Bring Them Back campaign, an initiative advocating for dignity and demanding justice for disappeared migrants and their families. This is Felix Gomez speaking about his brother, Pablo Jacinto Gomez, a native of Guatemala whose body was found after he attempted to cross the U.S.-Mexico border.
Pablo Jacinto Gomez.
Pablo Jacinto Gomez.
Él era mi querido hermano.
He was my dear brother.
La última vez que supe de él fue el día.
The last I knew of him was on Sunday, July 29th, 2018,
que fue la fecha que
the date that he decided to cross the border.
Ya lo encontramos.
We did find him, but not the way we had wanted.
Pero el día 10 de agosto fue el día.
On August 10th, we learned that the Colibri Center had found his remains. My brother crossed the border because in our countries we lack so many things, which makes us have to seek other horizons. My brother was a hard worker, brave, and a really friendly person. And as for whether or not I have hope for the future, of course I do. I hope that there will be better opportunities in our countries, that people from our countries won't have to risk their lives anymore to cross the desert and face the same fate as my brother.
Yo soy Felix Jacinto Gómez.
I am Felix Jacinto Gomez.
Y exijo que me lo devuelvan.
I demand, bring them back.
That was Felix Gomez speaking about his brother Pablo Jacinto Gomez, a native of Guatemala whose body was found after he attempted to cross the U.S.-Mexico border. For more, we're joined by Robin Reinecke, the co-founder of the Colibri Center for Human Rights and research social scientist at the Southwest Center. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Good morning.
So the numbers are horrifying. In the last, less than 20 years, we're talking about the remains of, the bones of some 3,000 migrants found in the desert in southern Arizona.
Yes, and those are the remains that have been found. So we don't know how many have been yet to be discovered. We do know that in addition to that 3,000, thousands more remain missing. So Colibri's database contains an additional 3,000 names of people who are missing.
And how do you identify, how do you match up families with their loved ones in the desert?
Well, it's exceedingly difficult, not only because of the desert environment, but also because the families live remotely. They face various blockades due to vulnerability, racism, marginalization. So really the desert is a horribly effective disappearing machine. But beyond the Sonoran Desert, where someone my stature could be skeletal within a matter of weeks, families also face the problem that they try to report law enforcement and they're turned away. Or they try to access a federal database and they're told you have to go to law enforcement, and then they're referred to Border Patrol. So the Colibri Center for Human Rights, which I co-founded, was founded locally in the space of the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner to respond directly to family need, to recognize that the families needed to be received with respect and honoring the fact that they are afraid, that they're going through something very terrifying, and that they have a human right to justice and truth and information.
You work with the Pima County Medical Examiner. Can you explain how that works?
Yes, the Colibri Center for Human Rights works very closely with the Medical Examiner's Office. In fact, the center was founded inside of that county government office, which is something that we're very proud of. It's not only the activists and the nonprofit people who are responding humanely to those losing their lives on the border, it's also county officials. So the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner does a beautiful, scientifically rigorous job of examining the remains, of examining every single skeletal case found in the desert borderlands. The challenge is that it's not their job to collect missing persons information, and that's what Colibri does. So Colibri focuses on the families. We build trusting relationships with every single family missing someone, searching for someone lost in that landscape. We collect all the physical information. When did they disappear? What happened? How old were they? What were they carrying? What did she tell you she was going to do when she got there? Everything that we can. We build a family profile, and then we collect DNA.
Groups like No More Deaths often find bones or a decomposing body. Does this help you in your work as you link up with families?
Yes, the families are terrified, they're distraught, they hate the idea that their loved one may be deceased and languishing in a desert to be consumed by animals. If you can imagine thinking about your loved one's remains being left out to be consumed by animals, what a horrifying thought that would be. So No More Deaths has discovered a lot of remains. I've had other groups like Águilas del Desierto and Humane Borders and many others. Álvaro Enciso, the artist, he's also discovered remains.
Who will be broadcasting later this week. We just went out to the desert with him to see where he plants his crosses. Can you talk about the importance of this work in restoring dignity to people so often uncounted in life, not to be uncounted in death?
Yes. Colibri, I've always felt despair in collecting these missing persons reports over the years, to be honest with you. And as I'm writing down the details and the names and the tattoos and everything that this family can remember about their dear loved one, is that we're involved not only in trying to find truth for that family, trying to find out what happened, in the case of Felix, to his brother, who we were able to successfully identify and give the family answers and some degree of closure, but we're also involved in a practice of witnessing with the family and recognizing that despite all of this horrifying rhetoric, despite everything going on, despite whatever their loved one went through, that they're irreplaceable and they mattered.
Robin Reinecke, I want to thank you so much for being with us, co-founder of the Colibri Center for Human Rights. Special thanks to our Democracy Now! Team here in Arizona, Maria Teresena, Charina Nadura, Tay Marie Astudio, John Hamilton, Libby Rainey, and Dennis Moynihan. And thanks also to Arizona Public Media here in Tucson. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Tammy Warrenoff, Sam Alkoff, Robbie Karen, Hani Masood, Trina Nadura, Tay Marie Astudio, Mike DeFilippo, and Miguel Noguera are engineers. Tune in throughout the week as we continue to bring you our series, Death and Resistance on the U.S.-Mexico border. I'm Amy Goodman in Tucson, Arizona. Thanks so much for joining us.